When we were young and newly married, we moved to Fort Worth to begin our time in ministry together. And when we got to Fort Worth, there was this thing, this store in Fort Worth known as Super Target. And to my wife at the time, Super Target, she said, was like heaven. And she would say that often. Matter of fact, so often that when we got ready to leave Fort Worth and move to Brownwood, she was a little bit disheartened because there wasn't even a regular Target in Brownwood, let alone a Super Target. But as she would talk about Super Target, it's like heaven, I would say, really? I think you're selling heaven a little bit short if Target, Super Target, no less, is your mark, right? And so that was our joke for a long time as we were young and newly married, and as we talked about, what do you want to do today? Oh, I want to go to Super Target. Oh, yeah, because it's like heaven, right? And so we just enjoyed that. But kind of in a similar vein, through the years, both with her and I, or even just friends and family, we would discover new toys or new gadgets or new items, and I would hear things like, this is life-changing, right? Just the other day, some of Audrey's friends were at the house, and Melissa purchased a new air fryer, and she was trying something out with the air fryer, and one of Audrey's friends says, "Oh, that is life-changing." And I said, "Really? An air fryer, this is a life-changing gadget?" And I think about just the times of past and the things that I have enjoyed, the gadgets that I've enjoyed getting a part of, and how at times I might describe them as life-changing. And much like Super Target is like heaven, I stop and pause and go, wait a minute, really? Like life-changing? I mean, when the locomotive engine was created, right, or invented, and railroads were stretched across the United States, I mean, that was life-changing, wasn't it? Absolutely, that was life-changing. But an air fryer? I mean, life-changing, really? And we have these things in our life and these moments in life that really are life-changing, more so than an air fryer or the latest technology. When I was thinking, I thought, in a sense, to some people, microwave popcorn was quite life-changing, wasn't it? Because, hey, I can get popcorn quick, and I don't have to do all the work on the stove, even though it is better on the stove. The convenience and the simplicity, the life-changing attributes of microwave popcorn, it's great. But really and truly, we do have moments, don't we? Moments in time that are life-changing moments. I think about when we became pregnant the first time. Surprise, you're pregnant. Surprise, it's twins. That was somewhat life-changing. But the real pivotal moment, the moment we knew that our life was forever changed, wasn't even the day that they were born. It came about 2 weeks after their birth, when it was finally time to take them home from the hospital. They were early, so they spent several weeks in the NICU, and there in the NICU, we would go back and forth and visit, and finally the day came that they were going to let us take our babies home. And we were excited, and we were thinking about how joyful it's going to be. They had kept telling us, you're not going to get to take them home until their due date, which was like December something. And we're like, no, we want them home for Thanksgiving. We can't do Thanksgiving without our newborn children here. Thankfully, before Thanksgiving, they got to come home. And so we go to the hospital, prepared to take them home, 2 car seats in hand, right? And we take the car seats upstairs, and we get the babies loaded in the car seats, are placed in, that seems kind of not a good way to talk about babies. But anyway, we get them in the car seats, we get them secured, and we carry them down. You know, they're the kinds that are baskets, and you click them in place, right? And so we get to the car, and Melissa, at this time, we have the car that she had as a college student, and the car that I had, which was a Jeep. The Jeep I still have, not the one I'm driving today, but the other one. And so obviously, we're taking children home from the hospital. It would be very inappropriate to load them in a topless Jeep to take them home from the hospital, right? I mean, that would show not very wise decision-making on the part of the parents, so we take her car. It's a little Ford Contour. They don't make them anymore, but maybe you know what a little Ford Contour looks like. It's a small sedan. And we carry the two car seats down, and we click one in place behind Melissa, and we click one in place behind me, and I get in the car, and the seat has to be all the way up, and I'm driving like this. And I look at Melissa, and she looks at me, and we go, this is not going to work. It became very real, and it became a very life-changing moment, because now, two of everything, right? And the house is cluttered and full of two bouncy chairs and two little baby saucers and two rocking horses and two cribs and all of a sudden our world shrunk. And it became a very pivotal moment for us as we began to understand that our life had changed forever. Not in a bad way, in a great way. And in a way that as young, pretty well newlywed and new parents, in a way that we could never fathom. And what a joyful almost 21 years with those children, adding a third one a few years later. Today marks 18 years for that child, for Ben. What a joyful time it has been. But that moment, squeezing into the car, feeling like Mr. Incredible trying to climb into his little car, going, life has forever changed. You know, Israel had a moment. Well, they had more than one. But in Numbers chapter 21, we read about a moment, a pivotal moment, a life-changing moment, if you will, for the children of Israel. We're going to spend more time in John chapter 3 in a little bit, but let me tell you about the events that are recorded in Numbers chapter 21. The children of Israel are on their way from Egypt to the Promised Land. And as they're journeying, they come to this place called Edom. Edom is actually the descendants of Esau. So they have knowledge of who Israel is, right? They are kin to them. They know who Israel is. And not only do they know them because of their kinship, because of the relationship between their forefather Esau and Israel's forefather Jacob, not only do they know of each other because of the kinship, Edom also knows of Israel because God has just done something amazing by delivering them from Egypt, and there's no way that anybody in the whole world at this point in time hasn't heard of Israel and the God that Israel serves. They've all heard about him. They all know, and as Israel is marching their way through, everybody that sees Israel coming their way is fearful. They don't want anything to do with Israel. Because look at what God just did. Look at what their God just did to Egypt. So they get to Edom, and Israel sends word to the king of Edom and says, we want to pass through your area. We will not stop and drink. We will not bother you. We will not take anything. We just want to pass through unharmed, and we don't want to harm you. Well, the king of Edom says, you can't do it. You enter my territory, you cross my border, and I will come at you with sword. We will defend ourselves. And Israel pleads again, we will pass through. We don't want to bother you. We don't want to fight. This is just the quick way through. We just want to pass through. We'll stay on this road. We won't stop. We won't pass go. We won't collect $200. We're just going through. And he says, you come and I take the sword. So Israel turns around and begins to take what would be considered the long way around. As they begin to journey around, you can imagine, like you and I do, we get weary as we travel, don't we? We made a quick trip to be at a funeral of a friend this weekend. We made a quick 36-hour round trip to the Metroplex and back, and by the time we were coming in last night, we were weary, right? You've been on that. You've had that experience that as you travel, the longer the trip takes, the more weary you become. And as you become weary, what happens? Your guard drops, you get a little cranky, you get maybe a little on edge, and maybe you even become short with the people that you love. There was a part of the trip yesterday as we were returning home that I felt I probably owe my wife an apology. Nothing really big, but I felt we had a discussion and I was a little short probably because I was tired and weary of traveling. Well, Israel, as they make the end around from Edom because they can't pass through, they become weary, their guard gets down, their complaining begins, and they become frustrated. And Numbers chapter 21 tells us that they began to complain against Moses and against God. You see, all this time, God has been providing for them. He's been leading them. He's been guiding them. He's been feeding them with manna and giving them water. And at this point in time, they're tired, they're frustrated, they're having to add to their journey because the king of Edom won't let them pass through, and they're frustrated. And so they complain. God, we want more than manna. We're tired. And they began to lose faith, it says in verse 21. They began to lose their trust and their faith, not verse 21, chapter 21. They began to lose their faith in God. And so, God, being the loving Father that He is, disciplines the children of Israel. His discipline comes in the form of poisonous snakes. And poisonous snakes begin to make their way through the camp, and they bite people, and as would be normal, if the poisonous snake bites you, you die. And so Israel, being punished because they were crying out against God, claiming that His provision, His manna, wasn't enough, wanting more, desiring more, begins to die. And as they see their people dying, nobody wants that to happen to them, and so they cry back out to God and to Moses. Help us, save us. And so God hears their cry once again, knowing His punishment has awakened them, and He offers them a solution. He says to Moses, build a snake, fashion a snake, a bronze snake, and put it up on a staff in the center of camp. And any time someone is bit, instruct them that if they are bitten, whatever, if they're bitten by the snake, turn and look on the snake and you will be healed. So God says, once again, I will provide for you, and my provision is, in the form of salvation, my provision is trust me again. Trust me. When you get bit, look to the snake. Not an idol, but look to the place that I will provide you with salvation. Now, that's a pretty illogical plan, right? I mean, just look on something and you'll be healed. You'll be saved from death. But that's what God said. He said, trust me. No, it doesn't make sense. But trust me. It's not about whether it makes sense or not. It's about whether you will take the word of the Lord and trust it and be faithful to it. And so Moses does, and all of Israel, as they receive a bite from a snake, they turn and look, and they are healed. In John chapter 3, text for the morning, Jesus is meeting with a Pharisee named Nicodemus. Maybe you'll remember that Nicodemus came by night. It's interesting on a number of levels. John spends a lot of time in his gospel talking about light and darkness and contrasting evil for the darkness and light for the good. And here, a Pharisee comes at night in a very confused place, looking for some direction and some understanding about who Jesus is, and they enter into this conversation, and Jesus presents this idea of being born again, and the Pharisee continues to be confused because he thinks in the physical sense, how in the world can I be born again? And Jesus continues to enlighten him on what he means. And when we get to verse 13 of chapter 3, we see that Jesus begins to reference this event of Numbers 21 for Nicodemus. Now, it's important to understand that for Nicodemus knew about that event. That would have been a very prominent story and thing from their history that Nicodemus would be familiar with, that he would understand, and that he would get. And so Jesus takes this moment of time, this important, this pivotal moment in the history of Nicodemus and his people, and he brings it into their discussion and into the view of God's work through Jesus Christ himself. And he says in verse 14, actually, of chapter 3, just as Moses lifted up the snake in the desert, you remember the snake from Numbers 21, the one that if you look on it and believe, you will be healed. Just as Moses lifted up the snake in the wilderness, so the Son of Man must be lifted up, that everyone who believes in him may have eternal life. For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish but have eternal life. For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but to save the world through him. Whoever believes in him is not condemned, but whoever does not believe stands condemned already, because he has not believed in the name of God's one and only Son. This is the verdict. Light has come into the world, but men love darkness instead of light, because their deeds were evil. Jesus turns to Nicodemus, and he capitalizes on this pivotal moment in the life of Israel's history, a moment where they had a decision to make, a decision that changed everything. Will you have faith in God again and be saved, or will you deny him and die? It would have been a teachable moment for the generations. And Jesus says, just like that moment, just like Moses lifted up the snake in the wilderness for the sake of saying, will you have faith in God and trust him completely? The Son of Man, you know, Nicodemus, me, Jesus, the Son of Man must be lifted up, that whoever will believe in him will be saved. There's this interesting concept. Nicodemus is obviously already confused about the whole born-again thing. And so now Jesus throws in this, like the snake, the Son of Man must be lifted up. And I don't know that it clarifies things for Nicodemus any better. We do find out later Nicodemus is one who stands in defense of Jesus. But we don't know that he left this place clear or with complete understanding. But Jesus says that like that snake, the Son of Man must be lifted up on the cross, providing salvation from death for all who will believe, who will look on, believe, or trust in him. And there's something very, very important to recognize in this statement from Jesus. What does he mean when he says believe? Many would say that believing is all that is necessary. But see, you got to understand that the message or the meaning of the word believe is more than just a spoken word. How do I know that? Do you remember what James writes? He says that you believe, good, even the demons believe and shudder. So if belief is only about saying something, only about expressing something, then we have the same belief as the demons. And are the demons saved? I don't think so. They shudder. Why do they shudder? In fear. In fear of who Jesus is and what that means for them who choose not to put faith in him. And so you see, belief becomes this idea that Jesus is presenting, that whoever will look upon, whoever will believe in the Son of Man will be saved. He's not talking about just a simple expression, but rather he's talking about a complete faith and trust. Remember the whole incident of the snakes and why that happened in the first place? Because they took their faith and their trust away from God. God had been providing them manna just enough for the day. Do you remember? They had to go out and collect manna each day. Why did they have to collect it each day? Because God was showing that he will provide. That he will provide for his people if only they will trust in him. And if they tried to do more, what happened? If they collected more than the day's need, what happened? It spoiled. God's gentle reminder to say, remember, I will give you what you need for the moment. Trust me on that. This is spoiled, but here's some new. But you see, Israel grew tired, and they wanted more than what they needed for the moment. They desired something more than what God was giving them. And so they withdrew their faith in him and took life, so to speak, into their own hands, and they wrecked it. There's a song we sing sometimes called, I think it's Make Me a Servant. I can't remember for sure, but there's a line in there that talks about you are the potter and I am the clay. And you get this image of God molding and shaping. I have never done pottery, but I'm amazed and love to watch people do it. And the art and the skill that they have to shape and make something. And the image of God shaping us and forming us. And then there's often a skit that's done that shows us taking the the pottery away from him and trying to do it ourselves, and it falls to pieces and turns into this lump of mess, right? And so humbly we hand it back to God for the master to shape it again. Israel took the pottery away. So we don't trust you anymore. We're going to do it ourselves. And so God sends a reminder, not so gentle, in the form of snakes, that reminds them God is enough. And it calls them back. And Jesus draws on that pivotal moment for them with Nicodemus, and he says, Nicodemus, a similar moment has come. The Son of Man will be lifted up, and he who will look to him and believe in him and trust in him, God's provision to be enough, he will be saved. And so we begin to see that belief is so much more than just an expression. That it encompasses an idea that says Jesus, belief in him, trust in him, looking upon the cross, believing in the cross, trusting in the provision of the cross, changes everything. It's the moment that I crawled into the car and couldn't fit and realized that our life was changed forever. What did we do? Well, we got a new car, a bigger one. We cleared out space in the house so that two of everything would fit. And our life began, those of you that are parents know, our life began to revolve around our children and not around ourselves. Everything changed. And what Jesus is telling Nicodemus is believing, like really believing, like true belief, changes everything. It changes everything because I believe in him, because I trust in the cross and Jesus Christ on that cross as God's provision enough for my life. Because of that, my life begins to, and the actions of my life begin to flow out of that belief and out of that faith. And now, all of a sudden, instead of hating my enemies, I love my enemies and pray for those who persecute me. Why? Because Jesus changes everything. And he said, if you believe in me, then you will live like this. We're reminded of, again, what James would write about faith. That belief or faith, belief with trust, is proved not simply by an expression of I believe. It's not, but rather it's an outflowing of a life lived because I believe. Because I believe, I tell the truth. Because I believe, I stand in integrity. Because I believe, I obey God. Because I believe, I love my enemies. Because I believe, I turn the other cheek. Because I believe, I serve the poor. Because I believe, I humble myself before everyone else in order to be the servant of all. Because I believe, I love unconditionally. Because I believe, my life looks like Jesus Christ. Because I believe, people will celebrate not my life, but Christ living through me. I told you yesterday we went to a funeral for a dear friend, an elder in the Lord's church. And I have to admit that between yesterday's funeral, and the one for my brother, those last two funerals have been the greatest funerals that I have been to. Not because they celebrated a man, but because they celebrated a life that pointed only to the glory of God. And that's what the life of a believer does, is even in death, it brings glory only to God, not to the person. And so, because we believe, we live for God. Jesus changes everything. The very lives we live are lived not for our purpose, but for His purpose. The goal or the mission of why we live is changed. It's not for me. It's not even for my children or my wife. It's for Him and for His purpose. That God be glorified and people know who He is through the life that we live. I've been amazed. My sister-in-law has shared with me several conversations that she has had with people that had the privilege of knowing my brother. And what's really been interesting is the conversations that she's been having with some Jewish people, some practicing Jews. The first one went like this. We came to the funeral, and on the way out, my daughter and I talked about how different that was than a Jewish funeral, and how our traditions don't have the same outlook of reuniting with people in heaven and God the same way that you guys celebrated that day. We said Jewish funerals are very sad and somber, and they need some more happiness in them. A few days later, another conversation with a Jewish friend who said, because of the life your husband lived, I have some questions about Jesus. You see, church, that's how the life of a believer is lived. In response to Jesus Christ on the cross is enough. God's provision for me. And I live to bring glory to Him so that others will see Jesus in me and go, I need to know more about that. In 1924, I believe it was, there was an Olympic athlete named Eric Liddell. You recognize that name? Maybe you don't recognize the name, but maybe you know the movie, Chariots of Fire. You know the movie now? I have to confess, I actually haven't seen the movie. I keep thinking I'm going to go, but I've read some of a kind of a shortened or an abridged version of his biography. Eric Liddell was an Olympic athlete from Scotland. His event was the 100-meter dash, and he was hands down expected to win the gold medal in the coming Olympics of 1924. Only there was a problem. As the Olympics began, as the Olympics got set and as the events got put in place, it was revealed that the 100-meter heats, trial heats, would be run on Sunday morning. And Liddell was a believer in Jesus Christ, and he said, I won't do it. I will not run on Sunday. Well, this rattled the sports world, and especially his nation and his country, because he was expected to bring home the gold medal. There was no one that could beat him. That was his event. Well, it would not keep him from going to the Olympics. Instead, he switched from the 100 to the 400. The 400 is a grueling sprint, okay? 100, quick and done, right? The 400 is 4 times that. Hey, I'm good at math, aren't I? It's all the way around the track, but it's at a dead sprint. Not an easy switch from what I understand. I'm not a track athlete, but not an easy switch from what I understand. But because he would not run on Sunday, it was either don't compete or change races. Well, he was not expected to do well in the 400. It was not a shoe-in like it was with the 100. But guess what? Call it what you want, a miracle, God's blessing, I don't know. But he takes home the gold medal in the 400 relay. Or not relay, in the 400 sprint. Against all odds, against all expectations. You see, church, I think there was a pivotal moment for Eric Liddell. And whether or not you agree with whether you can or can't run on Sunday, that's almost like a work on the Sabbath kind of a thing, right? Whether you can or you can't, the thing, or agree or disagree, the thing is he believed it. And Sunday was God's day, and he would not compromise that. And he stood firm in his beliefs, and I believe God blessed him. God blessed him so much that, do you know any other gold medal winners of the 1924 Olympics? You may not have known his name, but you knew the movie. And because you know the movie, you know the man. And you only know the movie and you only know the man. Why? Because he stood for his convictions of faith. He looked and he said, the cross of Jesus Christ, God's provision for my life, is enough. And I will live in that and for that only. And because of that, God blessed him, and his testimony of faith has been known for generations. He became after the Olympics, he became a missionary to China. He'd grown up in a missionary family. He became a missionary to China, and he served the Lord until his death as a missionary in foreign lands. You see, Jesus changes everything. But there's something very concerning to me about the church today. I'm not convinced that everybody understands and sees and allows Jesus to change everything. I was looking at some statistics this week about people losing their faith, namely children, as they're leaving the home and going off to college and starting life on their own. They say 22% turn away or lose or give up on faith. That's not a good number. But the other thing that I found interesting was there was this other category that they were giving statistics for, and I didn't see a number, but I appreciated the category of people, or category of believers, if you will. They called them the habitual churchgoers. They're the people who are always at church, but the bottom line is Jesus has changed nothing for them. They're checking the box. They're doing the right things. But their belief is simply just an expression, because the life that they're living hasn't been affected by God's provision of Jesus on the cross. And so this morning, as I stand in front of a group of people that have come to worship, I ask you the question, are you a believer? Are you someone who really believes, and because of your belief and your trust and your faith in Jesus on the cross as your provision for life, your salvation, has it changed your life? Or are you simply just a habitual churchgoer? One who expresses a belief, but who does not live in belief. Does Jesus change everything? When you confess that Jesus was the Son of God, when you were buried with Christ through baptism and risen again in him, did the course of your life change? Did you begin to love your enemies rather than hate them? Did you begin to humble yourself before all man in service, in love? Did you begin to seek to tell the truth? Did you begin to store up for yourself treasures in heaven? Or did you continue to chase the treasures of earth? Did you surrender your desires in exchange for His desires? Did your purpose and your mission change and become like that of Jesus Christ, or did you just simply continue to do what you had always done? Did Jesus change everything? As you go home today, I invite you to ask yourself the question, how is my life different because I believe in Jesus Christ as the Son of God? Because, church, Jesus changes everything. And if He doesn't, then what's happening?